there, and I'm on the side of the building. And then also in the Louvre, there is a shot of Amy Gilroy. Amy is on the call and will be piping in from time to time and assisting me and giving her insights, and then we'll give her time to talk as we go along. So welcome, Amy, too. Can you say hi, Amy?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that lovely picture, Rick.
Yeah, I didn't know you were in the Louvre, but apparently you are, so there. So yeah, so we'll get started here, and I'll just get going. Okay, so today, the purpose of today's webinar is the education grant, the Farm to School Education Grant. If you're here for the procurement grant, we've done those already, but they're online, the recorded version, so you could go to our website and I'll show you how to get to that. But we have a separate recorded webinar for that one as well. Okay, so before we get too far, I wanted to point out all materials, including this recorded webinar, which we're participating in right now, can be found at the Farm to School website. You don't have to write that down. There's a link there. That's actually a shortcut, but you don't need to go there. What you can do is hit the next slide, Michelle. And if you Google Oregon Farm to School, put that in there, you will go to the next website, which is, that's actually, you'll go, if you click on the first link of, if you Google, that's our old Farm to School website, and it's really hard to read. It's in like size 6 font, but it says we've moved, and what is circled there was that link that I just shared with you. So that, if you just Google Oregon Farm to School, you'll get here, and you can click on that, and there you go. You'll get to the new Farm to School website that we created last summer. So that is it. And the very top that is circled there is the Oregon Farm to School grant. That's where you need to go. And then when you get there, we have everything split. So we're going to be talking about everything on the right-hand side of the Farm to School grant page. That's the education grant. And obviously the left-hand side behind the arrow, that's where the Farm to School procurement grant is too. So, but if you get there, that is where we're talking about the right-hand side. Also, if there's any changes to the grant, or sometimes things happen, documents can get updated and things. Our preferred method of communication is our Farm to School listserv. So you'll need to sign up for that to be kept abreast of any changes of these grants. So how to get there? If you go to back, here's a shot of the main Farm to School page on the very bottom. There's a Join Us link. There's that. And then also on the Farm to School grant page, there's a Join Us link on there. And I think I have mine. Is that right? Yeah. Well, I have one on the main Farm to School page and on the Farm to School grant page. Anyway, I have 2 different links there. So there you go. Okay. So this grant is, there's one chance to, I said to sign up, but to put in an application actually for this grant. It's for both school years. It's for one biennium. So it's for this school year, 2017-18, and next school year, 2018-19. And I'll share dates, specific dates to that, in the timeline a bit. But anyway, it's for the whole biennium, and we're not doing a separate grant period. So today's agenda, we're going to go over a brief overview. We're going to go through the application process and timeline. We're going to talk about requirements for the application and how we score the application. We're going to talk about some allowable and unallowable expenses. And we're going to very briefly talk about reimbursement process and the requirements, just so you know what you're getting into, how we do that. And we're going to talk about reporting. And then at the very end, and as Michelle said, if you have any questions, feel free to keep typing them in the chat box, and we will get to your questions at the end of the webinar. Okay, so the bill that gives authority to this grant is House Bill 2038 that just got signed this last summer. And so I'm paraphrasing here, but it directs ODE to award grants to Oregon school districts for reimbursement of costs incurred of purchasing Oregon food products that meet certain criteria. That's the procurement grant. And also what's in the red for what we're talking about today, for funding food-based, ag-based, and garden-based educational activities. Hang on a second, you guys. We're going to attempt to mute the boops as people come in and out of here. And next slide. Okay, so want to talk about who's eligible to apply for this. And so what we have, this was the case the last time we ran this. The people that were eligible are still eligible are school districts, nonprofit organizations, or commodity commissions or councils. And those type, I get a question, what are commodity commissions? Those are the, like Oregon Beef Council, the Oregon Trawl Commission, things like that. So also added this time, through the way the law was written, the bill, these people weren't eligible before, but they are now. So I'm welcoming these folks to the fold. But Education Service Districts, or ESDs as they're known in Oregon, federally recognized Indian tribes, and schools overseen by the Bureau of Indian Education, and soil and water conservation districts. And we had a couple soil and water conservation districts that were in the grant last year, but they were also nonprofits. So, but now we just made doubly sure they're able to participate. And then, yes, one of the questions I get is, these organizations may partner with each other. There's nothing to preclude them. We just ask that one entity or one applicant be the applicant, and they can partner with other folks on there. Okay, so what's different about this time? Other than I said we have some new groups of people that are eligible to apply, which I just said. There's a couple more things, but I wanted to back up a little bit and talk about a very, very brief history of how we got here. So in 2012, which was when I first got to this position, we had this grant was $200,000, and it was actually both of the procurement grant and education was one grant together as a competitive grant. But it was $200,000 to fund all the things that I talked about. And then the next biennium started in 2013, and we got our funding increased to $1.2 million. And just again, like I said, 80% for food and 20% for educational activities. The next biennium was the one we just finished last school year, and we got $3.3 million added to the mix, bringing us up to $4.5 million. So that is when the grant was separated into two separate grants, a non-competitive grant to opt in for procurement and a competitive one for educational activities. And that's where we are right now. So this is the start of the new biennium, and we've retained that $4.5 million. So very pleased that we got funded again. So again, today's purpose is the grant for education, the Farm to School Education Grant for educational activities. That should read, not opportunities, but educational activities of the grant. This is a competitive grant, and the amount that's available, the pool of dollars for funding for the state is approximately $882,000. I get a question about this a lot, about what was funded last time. Well, it's written in the rules that says the grant award range is $2,000 to $100,000. However, last time the committee, the highest they went was $78,500, and the average award funded last time was $37,000. So that's not to say we're going, the committee is going to do that again, but that's what happened last time. And I think we funded 33 applicants, and I think about 50 applied, 50 different applicants applied. So what is required? The grant application process. An applicant has to submit an application It's a Word document that is on our website, and they have to send in a budget, which is an Excel spreadsheet, and a budget narrative, which is a Word document, to basically tell what is in the budget, so you can expand on ideas, because you can't really have a lot of dialogue in an Excel document. So an application, a budget, and a budget narrative. All those items can be found on the application materials section of our grant website. Also, right underneath that is the RFA, which is the request for application document. It is a guide, it is a step-by-step guide to complete the application, found in the application materials section. So we can really tell when somebody just fills out the application without looking at the RFA. You will want to download the RFA and read it. There's like 25 pages, and that's the most important document. We've literally spent 6 years developing this, myself and Amy and other partners, and it basically will expand on the application, and you should probably have it printed out while you're applying and using the application when you're filling it out. It's the most important document. In that RFA, this webinar is intended to be an overview. We're not going to go through the RFA page by page. That would probably take a couple hours. It's your responsibility to know what is on the RFA, and you could look at it. We're going to talk about some general things and talk about the scoring section specifically. Again, please download the RFA and look at it if you're going to apply. Okay, so underneath the application materials is a resources section. We have an FAQ document, frequently asked questions. It has all the questions so far from previous versions of this grant that are still relevant. We've kept some of those good questions on there. Anytime we've had a webinar, or we will add the questions that I received, for instance, in this webinar, to that FAQ document. And anytime I get phone calls or emails that gives me a new question, I copy it and put it in this document, and then I update it on the website, and it'll have an updated date on there. So if you have that and you see an updated date that's different, you should go in and look at the last question. It's a good method of capturing stuff, and that's how I get the new questions. If I have anything, like I said, that's dramatically different or a change, I'll send out a notice on the listserv. But if it's just a normal new question, I'll just include it on the FAQ document. So that is probably your second most valuable resource besides the RFA to download, is the FAQ document. We use a program called EGMS, or Electronic Grant Management System, to give our awardees their money. There is an EGMS instructions booklet you could print out and fill out if you're not a part of that system. There's a page at the end you fill out and send to me, and then I give it to the folks that manage EGMS. And we can get you set up if you're awarded a grant. And then also in the resources section, there's a budget worksheet example and a budget narrative example of a successful grantee. I've redacted it to protect the innocent, so it was an actual budget and budget narrative example. And I get questions a lot of what types of applications were entered. There's a document that lists all of our previously funded projects from last time. So that's a very valuable document to look at as well. It'll give you some ideas. Okay, if you're successful in getting an award, an email will be sent to the applicant that includes an award amount that the selection committee derived. So it'll give you your award amount, and it'll have links to the Farm to School website, actually, that'll have these things in here. Basically, an agreement letter to be signed and returned to ODE, me actually. It'll have an Excel claim reimbursement form. It'll have the EGIMS information instruction, which I've already talked about, so it won't be coming up later for EGIMS really. But once the agreement letter is signed and returned and you're set up in EGIMS, you can begin utilizing funds. And I believe the date when the award is made is in November. I'll have that on the timeline, which is coming up in the next 2 slides. But basically, once we announce the awards, it'll take a little bit of time to get the people signed up in EGIMS. Little note on that, sometimes people procrastinated to give me the agreement letter or the EGIMS information sheet. So if you want to get set up so you could start getting reimbursements, you'll need to send that in as soon as you can once you get an award letter. Next slide. Okay, so about the timeline. So probably later today, if not today, tomorrow, this recorded webinar will be posted on the website, and I'll replace the one that's on there already, because this is a new and improved webinar. Always learn from suggestions and things like that, and as well as have new questions on here. And then there's the last day to ask questions is Friday, October 27th. So you have all of October to work on this. And then the applications are due November 3rd. So we have a month to go on this right now. The reason there's a week of lag time between the last day to ask questions and when the applications are due, I guess this is a pretty standard thing for a lot of grants, but we want to make sure there's an even playing field where I'm not answering questions at the last minute to some groups and not the others. So we want you to get your questions in, if you have any like that, a week before the applications are due. Okay, more timeline. Yeah, Friday, November 16th is the date which all awards will be announced, and then that day we'll send out the letter, and as soon as we get your agreement and you're set up in EGIMS, you can begin getting reimbursed. June 28th, which is my birthday, if you want to send me a present that day, and no, your present can't be the progress report that's due. That's not an acceptable present, but that is the date that the progress reports are due. Is September. Oh, I'm sorry, did I say that again? No, my birthday isn't September 28th, it's June 28th, it's the next one, but I just saw the 28th and messed up. I've done that before. Anyway, the progress reports are due on September 28th. That's the first year after you've been awarded something. And then June 28th, my birthday, sorry. The funds have to be spent and all products must be received. And I want you to pay special attention to the next line, July 31st. All funds must be processed in EGIMS by July 31st. After July 31st, all unclaimed funds will be liquidated. If everybody hasn't read that, you should read that again. I'm really serious about it this time. We just had somebody submit a claim last week for last year, and there's no money left anymore. And there's a couple reasons why we need to, when we get people signed up in this and have award letters out, there's going to be another mandatory webinar to go over some of this stuff, so I make sure we're all on the same page. But I really want to make sure everybody knows about this before you get into the grant. But at the end of the school year, we have to spend all the money. Any money goes back into the pot. So it goes back to the legislature, so to fund other projects. So at the end of the school year is June 28th, and then you have a month to process everything in EGIMS. And then you have a final report, which is the following September of 2019, that is due to explain about your project. Okay, so who can fill out the application? Anybody can. There's no restrictions on who can or can't fill out an application, but the person who has signature authority or who can enter into agreements has to be listed in the appropriate section of the application. So there's that. And then since there could be multiple school districts and other applications, applicants working together on one project, It's important that all parties are aware of what's going on. We had a situation like this in the past where we had an application that was turned in, and it was like, oh yeah, it's this group is signing up for it, and we're going to work with this school district. And then the person that filled out the application, we awarded an application, and the person left the job. And so we talked to the other people that were at the organization and the school district they were going to work with, and they didn't know anything about it. So it's up to you to make sure, if you're applying for this, that they know it's coming and they agree that they're going to work with you on it. So the next slide says, like, for instance, if you're working, this is basically you're working with school children. At the school, does the principal don't know? Does the food service department know? If you're working with the food service department on procurement, on their buying local foods, and you're teaching the kids about the local foods, does the superintendent, does the business manager know about it? Those people need to be, you need to say that in your application in the appropriate spot. Okay, we're going to talk about scoring now a little bit. The next two slides are the actual example of the scoring sheet. So basically, going down here, the application you put in, this is in the RFA that gives you an example of it, but the committee will make copies of this. We have basically this score sheet on an Excel document, and they'll go through your application and look to see if these areas are addressed. So there's a possible point in every area. For example, the first area, and this is language taken right from the bill, but proposed project and activities are well designed and likely to succeed. And basically, the scoring committee is going to look at each one of these bullets and say, well, they talked about the first three, but they didn't address the fourth bullet and the fifth. But then they talked about the seventh, eighth, and ninth bullet. So that was this many bullets out of this, and so I'm going to give them 15 out of 20 points or whatever. So it can be a little subjective. So it's up to you. You guys really need to make sure you address each one of these bullets and do a good job of doing that to get the maximum points. Project promotes healthy food activities is the next one. There's 10 points for that. I obscured a little this by my logo, but its project has clear educational activities, 20 points for that. Next slide. And then the last page, and this all adds up to 100 points, but project involves parents and the community at some point, 10 points for that. The one that's highlighted is educational activities are tied to the district's farm-to-school procurement activities. I want to talk about that just for a second. There's 15 points for that as a maximum. So you don't have to work with your food service department. Like in the past, you might not get all the points for that, all 15 points. It's for instance, if your food service department is already in the procurement side of this, on the procurement grant, and they're buying local food, it would make sense if you partner with them and teach them about that local food. That would be a really good way to maybe get maximum points for that. If they're not participating in the procurement grant, you might not get all 15 points for that, but they have to still demonstrate that they're doing a good job, doing everything they can, working with local farmers, and you're working with the food service procurement practices to get all those points. Also, in there, yes, Amy, go ahead.
Rick, this is Amy. Can I just make a clarification on that criteria?
Sure.
So I think I think it's important to let people know that you can still achieve the full 15 points, even if the district that you're working with has not opted into the procurement grant, but you will have to show, as Rick is saying, that the educational activities are tied to what the food service staff or what the school is serving in the lunch line, even if it's just a one-time, even if it's just a one-time event. So I think a good example of this is for those districts that may be new to farm to school or just getting started. They may not have a full-fledged farm to school procurement program, or they're not sourcing a lot of Oregon products. But if the education activities that you're proposing to do in that district are tied to, say, for example, tasting tables, or maybe there's going to be a highlight or a spotlight, like a local lunch, and you're going to have a few farmers in that region provide some of the product to schools just for that lunch day, that is eligible to receive that full 15 points, because that's still meeting this criteria. So I just want to make that distinction that if the district you're working in is opted out of the procurement grant, that doesn't mean that you would not receive a full 15 points for this bullet.
I would just add to your to rebut on your rebuttal on that part. That will be up to the selection committee too. Like, I can see a situation where somebody is saying, oh, I'm doing tasting tables with my doing local procurement with farmers and all that stuff. And I could see another one saying, I'm not only doing that, but I'm also working with my procurement grantees, and they're doing all this, and I'm going to teach them about their local pick of the month. That might be going over and above the account. And the other point you're talking about, yes, the procurement grant has already, the time for opting into that has passed. So if you're thinking about signing or applying for this grant and you're working with a district that's not currently participating in the procurement grant, there's help this year for that. We set aside a certain dollar amount, a chunk of money of the procurement, of the total procurement dollars. We calculated everybody's award based on the dollars other than what I set aside. So we have money left over that's for people to opt in after the fact. If, for instance, like somebody says, okay, I work with XYZ nonprofit and I'm going to work with this school district, that they haven't opted in, but I've talked with them, and if we're successful, they will opt in and participate after the fact, and I'm able to work with them. So, because we've had people that say there's no way for us to work in this situation with a school district if they haven't opted in. Well, now there is. Okay, Amy, anything to say?
Nope, that sounds good. I would just,
okay.
Rick, you might want to just say that those rules that's in the proposed rules. That distinction of what the school districts can spend their procurement money on.
Yeah, right.
Those haven't been adopted yet, but that's pending.
Well, actually, right, the procurement rules have been there. We have temporary rules right now to operate for the procurement side of things. And the education rules don't say, I mean, they don't preclude us for like doing the opt-in. That's part of it's part of Department of Education's latitude to run the grant, and there's no rules. There doesn't have to be rules for that piece of it. But the education grant, the final adoption rules for the education grant, it just has to deal with adding ESDs, tribes, and some more cost measures, which I'll talk about in a bit. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna go on to the bullet that's underneath the golden arrow. Proposed activities are culturally relevant to the student served. This was a sticking point on a lot of applications last time, that some people would just mention this in brief passing, would either say, yeah, we're going to do something and have one sentence, but they didn't really say how they were going to have their activities be culturally relevant to the student served, or it didn't really, in the committee's eyes, meet that well. So that's a good way to make sure you get 10 points there, is address that. And then the last part is project must benefit schools with a high percentage of students eligible for free and reduced price meals. the intent of this bill and the law, it says that this has to go to areas of need. And so there's a matrix in here. It goes from a weighted average. You would put all the schools together that is going to be a part of your application. We can find your Oregon Department of Education will run a report, but we go through October data of the previous school year to have a level playing field for everybody for the schools that are stipulated in the application. But basically, as it says here, anything higher than 70% of the students would be 15 points. Anything 50 to 69% would be 10 points, and anything 40 to 49% would be 5 points. And then anything under 40% would be ineligible to apply. But I wanted to stipulate here, it's based on the total amount of students in here. So one of the for instances people have brought up is like, what if we have a school that is under 40% to apply for the grant? And I was like, well, yeah, if you only have the one school and it's under 40%, or the total of all your students you put in is under 40%, then no, you're ineligible to apply. But if you partner with schools that have super high free and reduced to bring your average up over 40%, you'd be good to go. So that would be the same thing as having one school that was super high free and reduced. There might be that many students in there that are under 40, but the average is over the amount that the 40%, you'd be good to go. It'd be really the same thing. So so basically, you get your average up by including more high free and reduced schools, and you'd be good to go. But you have to have your total over 40%. Okay, getting your money. This is a reimbursement grant. The Oregon Department of Education typically hasn't. Before the last time we ran this grant, the last biennium, we haven't done anything but reimbursement grants. But since the nature of the beast, since there's a lot of nonprofits that work that don't have a cash flow situation going on, they've made an allowance. They, meaning Oregon Department of Education, change the way things are done, and we are able to have up to 25% of your award be in the form of an advance. You don't have to get an advance. We had a number of applicants last time that took us up on that, but you can get 25% of your funding awarded as in the form of an advance. The award notification you receive will have instructions on how to do that. Okay. If you do get an advance, you'll have to provide documentation of all the items that were purchased with those advance funds. And I will go over that in the review process at the end. It's the same as the review process. But after the 25% advance is spent and you are able to justify all your expenses to me by providing invoices and such to justify that advance, then we convert over to a reimbursement system, and the other 75% of your award goes to a reimbursement style of management here. Okay, so requirements for reimbursement. You have to fill in your items in an Excel spreadsheet, and that we'll go over in great detail. If you're awarded a contract, we'll have another webinar, like I said, about the reimbursement process and the nuts and bolts of how to do that. But you'll submit this Excel worksheet to ODE, myself. You'll keep invoices, receipts on hand to justify that worksheet. I don't want to see them on the normal day-to-day basis for these reimbursements, for these claims. We will look over the Excel spreadsheet and see if the costs are justified and are in line with what is allowable. And then if they are, we'll tell you then to put the dollar amount into EGMS. That's our system for doing this. And normally what happened last year is people would just put the money in the EGMS, and then I would have to ask for the Excel spreadsheet because I don't know what it's for. And then if there's a problem, I have to reject the claim, and it gets really messy for the auditing department here and stuff. We don't want to do that. So that's why we ask you to put in an Excel spreadsheet to us first. Then I'll tell you it's okay to put the dollar amount into EGIMS. So don't do it first. The Excel worksheet will be located in the resource section of the grant website. I just have to tweak it a little bit. It's not ready just yet. And like I said, we'll schedule a new webinar for awardees if you're awarded a grant for a detailed instruction on how to do this. And this will be mandatory for all the people that gets awarded. And you know, again, it'll be the same format. You could watch it live, or you could at least watch a recorded version, and just as long as you watch it. Okay, so here's the allowable and unallowable cost section, and some of the changes that has happened other than eligible parties. At least 80% of your award must be directly related to food, agriculture, or garden-based educational activities. Now, you can use all 100% of your grant for educational activities, but at least 80% does. The other 20% of your award may be used for other reasonable costs directly related to administering the program, like program development, planning, prep time, direct administration, all of that stuff, administration that's directly related to the grant. There's 20% of that. Those things can be funded. Okay, I think I'll go into this a little bit more. Okay, labor, you can use labor in your activities and planning and administration, but please don't just say, we're just going to hire a person to do this and a full FTE. The nature of the bill that says the activities, the actual things have to be funded. We just want to know what you're spending on. So instead of just 1 FTE or 0.5 FTE, you would have to be in a format of like, oh, we're going to do for this claim, we're going to do, there's 40 hours times this wage per hour and plus this amount in benefits. And I have some really good examples on the budget worksheet and things like that. And there also will be an example on the worksheet, the Excel worksheet that you hand in. There's an instructions tab on there that will outline this too. You can fund some equipment on here, but the question I get a lot is we can't fund capital equipment or permanent structures or permanently plumbed things, but things that are portable, things that can be moved, smallwares, things like that for actual, or tools for teaching and things like that can be done, purchased or justified, but not capital expenses. Like one of the questions too, sorry, is like greenhouses. Yeah, you could do a greenhouse, but as long as it's portable, as long as it's not like, we won't fund footings and things like that and stick-built things, but portable greenhouses or sinks and things, like if you're teaching kids how to wash vegetables outside, we don't want to have a permanently plumbed sink in there that's part of the building, but if something that, you know, you can move and hook up a garden hose to or whatever, that would be very portable. So things like that. Okay. Administrative expenses, don't confuse administrative expenses with indirect costs, which aren't allowed, or overhead, but things like maybe the project director, things that they are doing to plan or doing things that's not actually hands-on or teaching or things like that, but overall planning tasks there. You must be specific about describing administrative costs. They have to relate directly to the lesson, educational opportunity, or the program. You can't claim general things like internet costs, electricity, or general administrative costs. So this is where it gets a little tricky. You know, like I said, 80% of the funds can be used for directly related to activities or the teaching activities. 20% can be for these other costs, but for these other costs, half of the 20 can be used for the administrative expenses, or you can use the entire 20 for planning, the planning part of this. But you can't use all 20 for administrative expenses. The Rules Committee wanted to put a little bit of cheese in that and make sure there was a maximum, like Amy said, there was maximum amount to go to the other planning phases of this, but not just administrative oversight for this. You can only use half of your 20% other for your administrative expenses. Okay, so for the review part of this is a randomly selected desk audit not associated with other reviews from the child nutrition program. Like when the child nutrition program also reviews food service departments and stuff. This isn't a part of that, but we select a certain number at random every year. Last year I put all the districts in a hat, and I had one of my coworkers pull them out of a hat, a certain percentage, and then we notified those people to verify one of your claims. And basically, we will say how we're doing this in the other webinar, but basically you will justify your claim like you do if you get an advance to us and myself or my assistant, and we will do a desk audit and make sure you're okay to go there. So there will be a review for some of you folks. One thing is we need to make sure there's adequate process being done in this grant, which means you're spending your money. Like I said before, at the end of the grant period, we have to make sure that we spend all our money. I don't want to go across the street and say, hey, that was really great, all of this money. We didn't spend it all, can we have more? That won't go well. So it's my job to make sure all the money is spent. We do a really good job to ensure that. But one of the things that makes me really crazy is waiting until the very end of the grant for you guys to do your claims. So when you have a application and it says this is my plan to do this, be communicating with us about what your plan is to make claims and do claims, because I don't want to assume and wait till the very last minute, because if adequate progress isn't being made, there won't be enough time we will have to reallocate your funds and give it to somebody else that can make sure that the funds are spent. And last time we got all this done, but it was a lot of phone calling at the end to make sure that you guys were on task. When I say you guys, the awardees. Please make sure that you have a plan to spend all your money and you're communicating with me. But we like to have adequate progress, mean half your money is spent halfway through the claim period, 3/4 is spent. And what that means is we'll be monitoring that, myself and my assistant, and it'll be flagged if you fall behind that. And at some point, we'll be calling you to say, hey, you're not spending your money. What's your plan? And talking to you about that. So that's what that means. So we will work with you on it, but it would be nice for you to have a plan ahead of time and make sure you're spending the money and claiming as well as you can. We don't have a specific requirement to do a monthly claim, but the most successful programs have been sending in monthly claims. They do a good job at doing that, and I really appreciate it. So at the end of this, we have to report back to legislature of all your NEAT projects. And so in order to do that, we use these reports. We have a progress report due on September 28th of next school year, and then at the very end, September 28th, 2019. We don't have there will be SurveyMonkey links. They're not active yet until the appropriate time, but we do have PDF copies of the report online right now, because we will ask you to collect data or whatnot. So it's good you can know what you're getting into. You could print it out, and when you're awarded a grant, you could print it out and have it at your ready, so you're collecting data, so you won't have to wait till the last minute. So those are on there right now. Okay, today now we are at the Q&A time, and I think we do have, I'm going to hand it over to Michelle, and she's going to take some of your questions.
Yeah, so we have a few questions that have already come in, but we're going to put the line on hold just for a minute to allow everybody an opportunity to think about what they just heard and ask any questions they may have. Point index finger to chin. Very thoughtful expression on your face. That's what Rick did. So we're going to put the call on hold, and then we'll come back to you. And Amy, if you have any feedback you want to hop in for, that'll be great too.
I have a comment whenever you're ready.
Okay. Amy, go ahead.
I just wanted to make a clarification about the timeline, just so people were aware that when Rick mentioned that the grants need to be spent during this school year and the next, that I wanted to make sure that people were aware that you don't necessarily have to have programming that occurs in this school year. You could, for example, say use some of your funds to do some planning and development in this school year, and then implement your farm to school educational program or activity in the following school year, as an example. So that was something I think he showed early on in the slides, that the funds need to be spent during these 2 years, but they don't need, it's really up to you to decide how you want to use those funds across the biennium. So for example, maybe some of you have summer programming ideas. You could use the spring, for example, to do your planning and development and design your project, and then implement it, over the summer. So I just wanted to, make that distinction. You could be awarded funding, but then if you only were going to start this in the second school year of the biennium, that's fine too.
Yep, I agree with everything Amy said. I just wanted to say, however, if you have a plan like that you're communicating that with us so we know what's going on, and you still don't wait until June of the second year to start putting in claims. For instance, like Amy said, if the first part of the school year you're doing your planning and development, you could still put in a claim for your planning and development costs and get that out of the way. And so you're still making more or less regular claim or some claims. So we're starting to use money up. You don't have to wait. We had some people last year that didn't do anything until spring of the second year. And it was like, well, here's some stuff from September we did. And it's like, come on, you guys. So I'm just saying that's fine. What Amy said is true, but just work with Oregon Department of Ed on your payment and your claims and a communication plan.
Awesome. And then one question that we did have, Rick, was does this mean that a whole school district has to apply, or can individual schools apply?
We've had both. There's no rules that say a school or a school district can't apply. We've had both. We've had nonprofits work with multiple school districts too. So yeah, and matter of fact, there's some school districts that are pretty low free and reduced, so they choose to put their eggs in the basket of like individual schools that would be successful would be able to apply at a higher free and reduced. So that's totally good to do too.
Okay. And then we had talked earlier about culturally relevant programming during the last grant cycle, and how some of the reviewers were not satisfied with some of the attempts that were given to meet those standards. Could you elaborate a little bit on what exactly reviewers are looking for when it comes to cultural relevance?
Well, and That's a really good question. I just know, like you can read it in the scoring criteria that it needs to be culturally relevant, and I know that was a big focus when we made the rules, that we had to have some attempt, and that's true with any of the grants at Oregon Department of Ed these days, that we want to make sure that there's cultural relevance, and that means different things in different areas. I don't want to be able to be so presumptive to say that, you know, there's one way of teaching to all student populations. And I think you guys might have some very specific things going on in your districts, and so that's up to you to be able to highlight that and say how you're going to do it. Like, hey, we have this situation here where we have this going on, and we're going to meet the needs of that group by doing this. And I can't, it's different for everybody, but what I was talking about where there was an issue was there was basically maybe one sentence or not any sentences addressing it at all, or just saying like, yeah, it was just very clear that there wasn't much thought put into it. Amy, do you have anything you would like to add about that?
Yeah, I'll just add on to that I think that if there's evidence in your application that you've either identified some of the cultural traditions or some of the I guess needs of the school community that you're serving in terms of food and garden and agricultural based customs that's inclusive of the populations that you're working with, that we were looking for either that you've already identified these with your, you know, either as you yourself as an entity that's applying or in partnership with others, or you plan to with these funds. So I think that is, you know, that's what we're looking for. We want to ensure that what you're proposing is culturally relevant to the community and to the students that you're going to be working with. So if you've articulated that, you know, that you either already know what these customs are, or that you plan to engage more of the student body population to determine what they are, either we're looking for, you know, those are the types of examples that we're looking for, is how you plan to use that information or identify what it is.
Thank you, Amy. That was well put.
Okay, so one clarification we needed. On page 7 of the RFA, the 8th bullet point says that all funds must be spent by June 28, 2018. Is this supposed to read all funds must be spent by June 28, 2019?
Yes, and I put that there to make sure you guys were paying attention, so good job. Yay. You got, no, I didn't really, but thank you. Yes, 2019, all the funds have to be spent.
Okay, great clarification. Thank you. Also, we had talked about 50 people applied and 30-something got funded. Could you explain what were some of the reasons why the applicants didn't get funded?
Yeah, I can try. I can say that the competition was brutal. Especially, you know, you spend so much time talking about the scoring, so people do a really good job of hitting all the bullet points on there, and there's not a lot of points separating the crowd at times. There were some that just didn't adequately, you know, the reason why is they didn't hit on a lot of the bullet points that were on the scoring sheet, plain and simple. Some of the ones that weren't successful, but there were plenty of applications that were really good that didn't get funded. Unfortunately, there's just not enough money to go around. I can't really say why. It's just that some really knocked the ball out of the park and they were really awesome, and then some were almost as awesome, but it was just like, you know, we had a really hard time with that. But I would just say to really address the scoring criteria as best you can. And there's no guarantees. There's not, you know, $882,000 sounds like a lot of money, but not a lot if you have 100 or 50 applicants, as the case may be. So.
Okay, and then before, when you were talking about not all of the wages could be covered by the grant, what percentage of a school garden manager's wage might this grant cover?
Well, no. You can't. I want to be clear. You can you can justify 100% of the person's wages. You just can't stipulate it as a position or a full-time position, period. You have to basically say, you have to break it out. And like on a month-to-month basis, say how many hours they're doing. May very well be that you're going to reimburse 100% of the person that's doing the teaching or whatever. But just like, okay, this week or this month, we've done 160 hours at this wage and this. But if you just say a position, it can't be justified well. So you just have to justify your cost.
Okay.
I think the other thing,
Yeah, Amy?
another way to look at it for those of you that are familiar with submitting grants for to cover personnel or to cover salary would be to take sort of the average amount of hours per month and determine what the FTE, the equivalent would be. So, for example, you could maybe you are 25% or 30% of the school garden coordinator, as an example's time would be spent on this project. So you would just simply use that 25% of that full-time position's salary for the year to determine that amount that you're asking for reimbursement for.
That sounds fair.
And then the other question was on the Farm to School procurement grant, when they received the award letter, it showed twice as large of an amount than what they expected for the year. And they just wanted clarification on, is that for both years of the grant?
Yeah, that will be the same, the education grant and the procurement grant as well. There's just one award period, and the number is for the entire biennium, this school year and next school year. That's correct.
Fantastic. All right, right now that looks like pretty much all the questions. Actually, we got another one coming in. We're going to put the line on hold just for a minute. Okay. Excellent question that we just had come in. It says, our organization is part of a diversity, equity, and inclusion cohort to improve our practices relating to cultural relevance, diversity, equity, and inclusion as an organization. Through the cohort, we hope to improve our ability to offer culturally relevant activities and teaching. Can participation in this cohort count towards this category of the grant activity, or must we demonstrate how specific activities are culturally relevant?
That's an excellent question. I think here's a good example, I hope. I could see where if you put down, okay, I'm a member of this cohort, and we're, and just leaving it like exactly how you stipulated, yeah, that's worth some points. But if you go into more detail to say, I'm a member of this cohort, and here's how exactly I'm going to tackle this issue and apply it to the grant, that would be more points. So it's just, that's a good example of, you want to maximize your points on the score sheet. So you want to be as detailed as possible. Amy, would you like to chime in on that as well?
Oh, I would say that, well, in any example like that one, I guess I would underscore what Rick said. I mean, if your participation in the cohort is going to, you can tie the participation in this cohort to that individual, building that individual's capacity to deliver, or to, I'm not sure if this person would actually be, delivering educational activities, but as long as there's clear alignment with the program you're delivering and why the participation of someone in that cohort is relevant, I don't see why you wouldn't get points for that. Again, I think you'd want to be, if your programming is tied very closely to this group, then I think it would make a lot of sense for there to be kind of I mean, I think you'd be able to be participating kind of more fluidly. So I don't think it would be, I mean, if you're asking if funding could be used to pay for the time that this person spends in these meetings, again, as long as those meetings are relevant to the education you're delivering, it would be fine.
Yep, I agree. And just to tie this in with how it went last year, there was some groups that didn't even address this at all, and they got 0 points in these categories. And then, not to put words in the mouth of the selection committee, I'm not part of the selection committee, I just convene them, just so you know. But I could see something like this, and in a situation like this, when you're looking at it versus all the other ones and stuff, it's like, okay, you could get half the points for this. And then somebody else that does this exact same thing, but then says, this is how we're applying that cohort, and I have some specific examples of using this situation to incorporate in that, they would get the max points for it. So I think you're on the right trajectory.
Awesome. At this time, it doesn't look like we have any other questions, and we are right at the end of our time. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. ODECMP holds all of their meetings in connection with the USDA.
Staffing, what's on the screen?
Discrimination statement. We are an equal opportunity provider. We look forward to having you meet us again later in the future.
And if you are too shy, and if you want to ask a question, send it to me in the email, and I'll get it on the frequently asked questions doc. Thanks very much. Have a good evening or afternoon.
Thank you for joining us, Amy.
Yeah, thank you, Amy.
Thank you.